Alright guys, so the title of this video is "The Struggle is Real, but Suffering is Optional." I'll talk to you about how I overcame depression and suicidal thoughts. Now before we get started, obviously want to state that I'm not a doctor, not a psychiatrist, or basically anyone you should take advice from. But what motivated me to do is a couple things going on in my life. 1st September is National Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. So I really wanted to make this video for people out there that might be suffering or struggling with that. Now, I was going to give it like a facetious title, like do-it-yourself, depression, and suicidal, whatever. I couldn't think of anything, so I just left it at what I have right now. So, back to the title. Now, actually, it's a play on words for the Buddhist saying, and one of the Buddhist fundamental beliefs is that life is pain and suffering. And basically how we overcome those things is how we as humans seek or achieve enlightenment or nirvana, whatever they call it. I'm not a religious scholar either, but anyways, before we get started into all that religious stuff, I want to kind of give you a backstory of kind of where I was a year and a half ago. I was extremely depressed, I was extremely suicidal, but I didn't know it. I just knew that something wasn't right. I knew that I just wasn't myself anymore. I didn't want to go out anymore. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I just wanted to sit at home by myself and not see anybody. And so I really didn't know what was going on, but I didn't really acknowledge it either. So, I mean, I knew I wanted to get better, but I really just didn't know how. And one night, I just remember this night as it was my deepest and darkest moment. I actually just was like, okay, well, maybe suicide is the option. And just so you know, I forgot to mention this earlier, my father committed suicide about 5 years before this. So I thought, well, man, this is probably what my dad went through. Maybe this is the best option. Like the thing about depression, and I actually watched or listened to a podcast today from I think her name is Violet Benson. I don't know. I follow her on Instagram. Follow her on a couple of her pages. And today I just happened to click on her podcast because it was talking about depression and how she didn't want to be sad anymore. But what she was talking about was that, all the things that she did, and she wrote down her thoughts, her feelings, and it really just helped me out. And that's actually one of the things that motivated me to make this video. But like I said, for myself, I was just at my deepest and my darkest time. I just didn't know what to do. But I just went through it, and I was just like, okay, so if I were to commit suicide, what would I do? And I just remember thinking, okay, well, if I do it, I want to do it. Like, I don't want to fail at it. Like, that would be embarrassing. And that was one of the things that was causing my depression and my suicide. And what I forgot to mention earlier, the reason I started talking about Violet Benson, she mentions a quote that somebody else talked about, and which is that depression is the most exclusive club because it makes you feel like you're the only member, which is not the case. I just want to let you know that, and that's why I'm making this video. But anyways, I just remember thinking, this is probably how my dad felt. Like, this is how he felt. This is what he went through. So maybe this is my fate. Like maybe it's written in the stars. Who knows? And so I was like, well, how am I going to do this? So I thought about, what if I hang myself? Like, what if I fall? Like, I was like fat at the time. I was like 200, well, fatter, whatever you want to call it. I was like 220 pounds. Like, what if I break the rope? Like, it's embarrassing. I have to walk around with a messed up rope neck, or if I try to cut myself, that's embarrassing because like I'd never be able to wear long sleeves again. And I just kept like, finally, after about an hour, I finally was like, okay, I think I decided on cutting myself. But anyways, I realized that over an hour had passed, and I was just laying on my floor, and I just couldn't get up. And it wasn't like laying on a couch or pillows or blanket even. I just was like in the middle of my living room floor. And I was just like, wow, like, how did I get here? But I physically did not have the power to get up. And I just immediately after that, I just fell asleep. And so I woke up the next morning, and I felt weird, but a little bit better. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. And I think what I was doing, just the mental exercise, caused just my brain to just overwork itself. It was just like, how are we gonna do this? Like, it was just like a dog, like, okay, hey, let's do it. All right, how are we gonna do it? And so I was just like super excited to fix myself. So I think that's what happened. I just overworked myself, and we'll talk about the the happy chemicals later on in this video. But so I felt a little bit better. I was like, well, what's something I enjoy doing? What's something I can do on a regular basis? And the only thing I enjoyed doing at the time, and I could do it on a regular basis, was going to the gym. So I started going to the gym every single day. Started getting really strong. I was just pushing myself each and every day. I was pushing myself as hard as I could. Got to the point where the little gym I used at my apartments I lived at, I was using all the weights on everything. And I was about to, just have to join a gym, but I enjoyed staying there. It was close. I had no excuses. But then shortly after that, I got back into yoga. And also at this time, I also started doing keto. And then shortly after that, I started doing fasting. So it was a progression. Like, it wasn't a one and done. I wish I could tell you it was a one and done. How I tell people is that, like, the next day I felt this much better. Then the next day I felt that much better. Then that much better. Then that much better. Then that much better. And it took about 4 or 5 weeks before I was a normal, functioning human being again. And so after that happened, one of the things I did is I named my depression. So when I know when it comes to me. And another thing that I want to make this video is today I'm a little under the weather. And the reason that's important is because is when we get sick or when we something happens to us, the first thing our body does is it tries to identify it so this doesn't happen again. So if you get a cold, that's why they do flu shots. So if you get a flu shot, your body knows, hey, if this happens, kill it, because it'll kill us. And so that's kind of what happened, I think, with my depression. It was once I was able to identify it, label it, and I named it darkness. I don't know if you've ever watched the Chappelle Show with Charlie Murphy. And I just kind of look at, like, I was Rick James and Charlie Murphy was just beating me up with depression. And so if you ever watched that video, if you've never watched it, please go watch it. And if you've seen it, watch it again. And to be honest, like, anytime it would come to me, I was like, oh, hello, darkness. And I was like, hello, I try to say my Rick James voice, and just the audacity of it would actually make me giggle. And I just remember, like, thinking, like, slap, like, you gotta watch that video. But anyways, so that's really what helped me, is just naming my depression. I named it darkness, a silly name, a very facetious name, like about a very serious subject matter, but I was able to identify and overcome it, and so that's what you need to do. And you need to find the one thing that makes you happy, whatever it is. If it's your kids, if it's school, hopefully it's nothing negative like drugs or food or things like that. But the thing I want you to focus on is your happiness is already inside of you. So the things that you enjoyed doing as a kid, like playing or singing or dancing, like that's who you are as a human. Like we get brainwashed by our society that we have to go out for the most beautiful house, the most beautiful partner, and like we have to achieve all these things, but most of it is internal. And so find the thing that makes you happy. Find what you're able to accomplish inside your own brain, and kind of go mention the happy chemicals, as they're called. And I think when I had that overexertion of thought, I think I kind of produced some dopamine afterwards, and we'll kind of talk about this really quick. So your endorphins are what happens like when you're doing a run, you're achieving something really hard, your body, your brain starts producing endorphin to give yourself that extra boost. So maybe there was some endorphin rush in there. The next thing is dopamine. Dopamine is when you do something, it doesn't even matter how big it is, how small it is, like maybe just getting up, maybe like saying hi to your neighbor, maybe it's very simple things. Dopamine is actually the easiest thing for your brain to produce. It doesn't matter how hard it is. Like I could say, what if I could balance this pin on my finger? Or that's probably a bad example because it's harder than I thought it was, but that was the first thing that came to mind. But something with dopamine is just achieving something minor, major, it doesn't really matter. It just, your brain gets pleasure from achieving things. The next thing is your serotonin. So your serotonin levels are state of well-being. So it's things like, wow, this is really awesome. Like I'm sure you can remember times in your life where you're like, this is super awesome. Like for me, I know it's when traveling, and that was one thing I started doing too. I went to Mexico for 6 months. I started traveling more. I started doing the things that I enjoyed to do. And maybe you're not able to go to Mexico for 6 months, but there's something you can do today to overcome this. But also, so just finding the thing that gives you a state of well-being. Could be making your bed. I actually started making my bed when I was in Mexico. The house I was staying at had a maid, and I felt bad about having her make my beds. I started making my own bed, and I still to this day make my own beds. Like, this is like a year later. Just little simple things like that produce serotonin, so a state of well-being. Cleaning your house, just anything that produces serotonin for you, just do it. Oxytocin, that's the next one, and that's the love drug. To be honest, like, that's kind of one I struggle with, because I kind of have I get along with everybody. I love everybody, but then there's that wall I put up sometimes, and so, like, for me, oxytocin's not always easy to produce. So I stick with the other ones that are easy for me to produce. So you may have the opposite situation, but that's the thing. Like I said, is you have to find what works for you. What works for me may work different for you. It may not even work for you. And one of the videos I watched today, another one I watched today, was a TED Talk, and like I said, Violet Benson mentioned this about Andrew Solomon. I actually watched 2 of his videos, and one of the things he said that really stood out to me was, if standing on your head makes you feel better if you have cancer, when you no longer are standing on your head, you still have cancer. But with depression, if you stand on your head and that makes you feel better, when you are that actually cures your depression. So that's the thing you have to realize, is the things we do are actually the cure for the thing that's bothering us. So and like I said, it leads back to what I was talking about earlier, is finding your happy chemicals. One thing he talked about, and I think it was in that video or his next one I watched 2 of his videos, really good stuff. So Andrew Solomon, TED Talk. But one of the things he talks about is finding meaning in your depression. He talks about growing up gay and, like, not knowing he's gay and, like, trying to not be gay, and he talks about how all these things helped him become a stronger person. And he wishes he wouldn't have. Sorry, I'm getting emotional talking. So, like, I wish my dad wouldn't have killed himself, but that made me who I am, So anyway, that's me finding my meaning. And so that's why it's so important for you to find your meaning, because it may not be in something simple. It may not be in something that's you've thought about before. It may be in something that's completely outside of your realm, completely out of your comfort zone. For me, even, like, when I'm thinking about that was, I have goals. I have really big goals for myself, and I have no idea how I'm going to accomplish it. But I have these goals and this vision, and this actually segues perfectly. I didn't even plan that about my dad part, but it segues perfectly into Dr. Joe Dispenza, and what he talks about is the placebo effect, and how just thinking you're going to do better or going to fix yourself, or thinking that this medicine is going to fix you, actually causes your body to fix itself. It's an amazing book. I read both of his books. I think I listened to one of them. I think I listened to both of them. Or I think he has like 2 or 3. But anyways, I listened to 2 of his books. I think I read one of them. But look him up on YouTube. He's so good. He's on Facebook too. He always produces really good content. But yeah, guys, I mean, like I said, just finding something that motivates you, that inspires you, that gives you life. And one of the things that Andrew talks about is he talks about how the opposite of depression is vitality. But for me, and that's probably his opposite of depression, which I totally get. I can't argue against it, right? It makes sense, like being full of life. But for me, I felt like my opposite of depression is compassion, so that's why I have a big heart for people that are fighting depression, or homeless, or even gay. Like, that just breaks my heart that somebody like that somebody like couldn't like be themselves. Like, that's because probably because I struggle with being myself sometimes. Like, Violet talks about that too, how like sometimes people say she's too much to handle, and sometimes I feel that way, and that actually what led to my alcoholism, which we'll talk about in another video probably. Who knows? If you want me to talk about it, just let me know. But that's how I overcame my alcoholism. I realized that I used alcohol as an excuse to be outlandish, as an excuse to do stupid things, to sleep with girls I wouldn't normally sleep with, to be just this crazy, outgoing, like super extroverted guy. I am slightly extrovert, but I'm an ambivert, which, if you know what that means, I'm both introverted and extroverted. So I enjoy time alone. Like today I was sick. I was at home in bed all day. I loved it. Like, it was great. Like, even though it sucked that my body was in complete pain, like, I still enjoyed, like, being home alone. Even though, because it was raining, so I don't know if it was, like, my seasonal depression I get sometimes, but it was still, like, some sort of solace to that. So I guess you would call that serotonin well-being, I guess. And that's the thing you have to realize is whatever, like, you get used to, your body will actually find peace in it. So if you have, like, an abusive relationship, your body will find a way to produce serotonin. I'm probably going on too many different tangents, but anyways, if you like this video, please like it, share it, whatever you want to do. If you want to comment on it, I'll answer your questions you may have. But I appreciate your time. Thank you again. All right, bye.